Welcome to Ultra Uncovered, the podcast where we explore the untamed world of ultra running. I'm Corinne Shalvoy.
And I'm Russell Ditsworth. Together, we're peeling back the layers of iconic races, challenging terrains, and the incredible stories that fuel the passion for the sport.
Get ready to uncover the raw essence of trail running.
Episode 2.
Episode 2.
Here we go.
Woo!
All right. So today we are going to talk about
the Gorge Waterfalls 50K and 100K.
Absolutely.
This is a iconic Pacific Northwest race that's steeped in tradition and has a long history, and we're going to talk all about it and hopefully give the listener some inspiration to visit this beautiful part of the country.
Sounds great. Well, let's kick it off by talking about, first of all, what kind of beverage do you have? And then let's run through what shoes we're wearing.
Okay. So I today am not drinking an alcoholic beverage, but it's in a fancy glass. It's a Spindrift Raspberry Lime.
Ooh.
Yeah. So it's nice and refreshing. What do you have, Russ?
I've got a Stone Brewing. It's a salt and lime lager, but I'm loving the vibe on the can today, so that's what I'm going with.
Yeah, it's got kind of a Sugar Scully vibe, which if anyone knows the Castle Rock Run Club, that is our logo, so love the artwork.
Absolutely.
All right,
well, cheers. All right, nice. Now in honor of Gorge Waterfall 100K, I chose a shoe that can do a bit of everything. It's a shoe that's very comfortable for me, and I think that these are important attributes for Gorge Waterfall 100K. So I've got the, I don't know if you can see it, it is the Nike Pegasus Trail. This is the version 2.
Peg Trail 2.
Peg Trail 2s.
Okay.
But it's got a full rubber outsole and very comfortable shoe. Good for road to trail and does well for me on technical terrain, so pretty happy with it.
Awesome.
What about you?
Okay, well, you can't exactly see the fanciest part of my outfit, which is this giant skirt, but I have got the Cloud, I should say, Cloud Ultra 2s on, and it was more of like a choice that went with my outfit than necessarily.
All black. Yeah,
they're all black. My friend Ellie Pell sent these to me, and I really like them. I've been running in them, and they're really comfortable. I could see wearing them, although I worry about getting stuff in the holes. So I don't know. But I could see wearing them in 100K potentially. So yeah, it's more of a fashion choice for me today.
That sounds great.
And I have my umbrella just in case, because we're talking about the Pacific Northwest.
You know, we are talking about a Pacific Northwest race, and it's always important to be prepared for rainy weather. I've heard people like Corinne Malcolm say that if it's not a torrential downpour, that's just normal conditions. So lightly raining, that's not even really rain. That's just normal Pacific Northwest conditions. So
yeah,
you have to be ready to be wet. You have to be ready to prepare for that type of environment while you're running 62 miles.
Yeah, so starting with kind of the time frame that the Gorge Waterfalls races happen around in April, they actually have moved the race a couple of weeks later this year than it was last year, maybe in an attempt to better the weather window, but it's also just always kind of a crapshoot, I think, in that, just that part of the country. So this year, the race will be April 12th. And 13th and 14th, there are 3 distances. We're looking at a 30K to start off, and then the main event, or kind of the marquee event.
Absolutely, the marquee event.
Yeah, would be the 100K Saturday, and then there's a 50K on Sunday. These each have generous cutoffs, so 6 hours for the 30K. 18 hours for the 100K and 9 hours for the 50K. You do need to finish the 100K in 17 hours, I believe, to get that Western States qualifier, but it's also a Western States qualifying race.
Nice. Very nice. We haven't talked about it, but it's put on by Daybreak Racing. This is the group that's linked with Free Trail and Dylan Bowman and kind of that media group that is now also organizing races. And traditionally, this had been a race from Rain Shadow Running, who had also done a fantastic job with this race. Prior to the wildfires in 2018, this race was a golden ticket race for Western states 2 times, 2016 and 2017.
Yeah.
And so it has had some marquee stage as well. And I think now this is Daybreak's third go at the race. They did 2022, 2023, and now this race is their third at it back, and it's more popular than ever. So if you do want to do this race, I would look at the signups very early on. They do cap the participants at around 450 people per event. And there's over 100 on the wait list for the 50K and for the 100K as of the middle of February. So a month and a half out, and there's still a fairly significant wait list.
That's awesome. So I mean, Free Trail, Daybreak Racing do great things. I honestly would not be that surprised if at some point this race became a golden ticket race again. It was at one time. Obviously, it's got that appeal. It is, our last episode, we talked about Black Canyon. This race is also a race that you can run and that can be run in a fairly quick time, kind of depending on the conditions you're given. So I don't know. I think that it has kind of all the things that, make for potentially a great golden ticket race. So we'll see if that happens in the future.
It also has prize money for the top.
It does.
Top 3 men and women in both the 100K and the 50K. So it's doing what it can to attract a competitive field. And I think you're right. I think it's just a matter of time before this race or another race by Daybreak becomes another one of those golden tickets.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember there's great photos. Of course, Free Trail is a media outlet as well, so they do amazing content.
Yep.
This year, the race is going to be live streamed by Mountain Outpost. So even though they did do they did a lot of updates and a lot of social and some follow cams and kind of live streamed it last year, but not with a major, in a studio setup.
Sure.
And so I think Mountain Outpost going to the race this year, doing both the Big Alta, which is happening this coming weekend. We're recording this mid-February, and Gorge Waterfalls. It's just going to elevate it that much more. But yeah, there's great photos of people standing on the podium with their big checks, and it's just kind of cool. It's exciting.
Yeah, it's namesake Gorge Waterfalls, so there's got to be some good running pictures up and underneath the waterfalls and with waterfalls in the background. And so the setting is there for this to be fantastic. I don't know that the drone footage is going to do much for them here.
So I was talking to Zach Marion a little bit about this recently, and they're going to try to fly drones.
They're going to still try.
They're going to fly them.
Good.
They just might be kind of low. And I think that, it's going to be a test of the true, abilities and skills of your how
the flyers,
drone pilots. But maybe if they work in that area often, they're used to it. So yeah, apparently we're going to get some drone footage this year, so could be very cool.
Awesome.
Yeah, the landscape is really neat. So I had never been to this part of the country, and it truly feels like a very different place. Just the amount of lush, you start driving by and all of a sudden these waterfalls appear out of nowhere, and they're just everywhere, and everything is super lush and moss covered. And it kind of feels like a little bit of a Wonderland kind of fairyland environment. And so it's just a stunning place to be running.
Yeah. And the perspective that I have is even when it's not raining, it still feels like things are wet, right?
Yeah.
There's moss on the trees. The ground is damp.
Yeah.
There's just that piece of it, that moisture piece of it. And while it's not like a high humidity area, it's still, you still have the elements there. Yeah. So it's something to consider.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the, anything else. Actually, were we going to mention kind of current course records?
Yeah. So
let's get back up to some of that info.
I think that I have these right down here.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us who has the men's and women's course record for the 100K? We'll just stick to the 100K.
Yeah, being the marquee event. So 2017, I am not aware of what the conditions were that year or exactly if the course is exactly the same as it is now at Daybreak. But I would say that they're probably similar considering they've kept all of the times, on the same slate.
Yep.
Mr. Jim Walmsley ran an 8:20, 8 hour, 20 minute. And that was actually, it was either last year or the year before. Someone came within about 8 minutes at that time, but he still holds the course record. So Walmsley with an 8 hour, 20 minute 100K. And I think it is just a touch long, in terms of mileage. And then in 2022, Hannah Allgood, who is, one of our local
Colorado Springs
pros, she went out and smashed the course and ran a 9:34. So that is the current women's course record, 9 hours and 34 minutes.
Yeah, that's a blazing fast time. I will be very interested to see if runners are starting to get close to that.
Yeah.
Upcoming with the competitiveness. So
yeah.
Anytime you can get within 10 minutes of a Jim Walmsley course record, you're doing all right. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
And then just another note here. It does seem like, this is the type of course that lends itself to, it's almost like a little bit like a looped course where you get real close to start finish, you get real close to aid stations that are next to roads. And sometimes I think it makes it a little easier to maybe end your day at something like that. And there is from last year's data, there was about a 65% finisher rate. And so I guess that's one thing to watch out for, is make sure you have the things that you need at the aid stations and don't give yourself an easy out to end your day prematurely based on a planning piece. And we'll talk a little bit more about like what maybe to put into your drop bags and some of those things, or to have at the aid stations for your crew. But let's talk a little bit about, and I want to read the description from Daybreak on how the course feels underfoot.
Yep.
And then I'm going to ask you what that really means, because I think the description is great,
yep.
But let's just go with that.
Okay.
So course description underfoot, this is verbatim from the website. So if you've read this, I'm going to listen. I'm going to have you hear it one more time. The trails feature a variety of surface types, primarily rocky, semi-technical single track mixed with more smooth dirt single track. Course is generally very runnable, with many punchy hill climbs and some very rocky technical sections through the many open talus slopes. There are some extended intermittent sections of paved pedestrian bike path connectors and some rural road shoulder sections to connect some of the trail sections. So when you hear that, what goes through your mind in terms of like how you might prepare for that, or what kind of things you would be thinking about in terms of the ground underfoot?
Yeah, I think it's a great description. If I had to say, like, now that I've seen the course, now I haven't run the race, but I've crewed. And so I've seen a lot of it, and I've run certain sections of it just casually. I think that you're gonna, I don't know, I think you probably could wear a road shoe at this race if you really wanted to, depending on how comfortable you are with, slipping or kind of like, either kind of slightly slick rock potentially, or, if you feel just like you can navigate, a little bit rocky technical terrain, with that shoe on. So I think you could go either road shoe or trail shoe. And we talked to Keely in our interview, spoiler, but teaser alert after this about the shoe. But I think that, I think you also need to wear a shoe that you feel like you can move quickly in, that's not hindering that. And, you could probably just go either way. Like underfoot, I just think you're going to be on some rocky stuff, but there's going to be some smooth sections, and there's going to be some really runnable, easy, like don't have to worry about my footing. So maybe it's just kind of like that turning on and off the focus and kind of paying attention. And I think you have a good mix of a lot of different terrain underfoot during the whole course of the race.
Runnable slope, I think, is something that's important to think about here too. So you're talking in that 5 to 10% range of like, hey, this is something that you would run every time on a training run kind of thing, right?
Yeah. What is that called? What's that called, Russ? What do they call it? 5 to 10% uphill grade?
I think it's called douche grade.
Yeah.
And it's really just meant to say like, hey man, you should really probably try to run this thing. But what I will say is there's one big climb in the middle where there's a steeper section. So you might have about a 5-mile section over by the Joaquina Falls area where you do have some steeper, rockier stuff. But the rest of the course, if you average out the slope and the distance, you're right in that. I think it's like 6% grade. So, yeah, you've got some flat sections in there, but what I would say is that you should have runnable, movable terrain in there throughout.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, so looking at the elevation profile in general of the 100K, like you mentioned, you kind of have a couple of the first, up until what mile is that? 30-ish? 30 miles. So it's like a 15
mile 38 really.
Okay.
So it's like before you get onto the Pacific Crest Trail section, from Cascade Locks out to the out and back to Wyeth, you've got kind of this rolling terrain with a big climb in the middle.
Yeah. Okay. So do you want to go through aid station at this point and just kind of talk about what's available there?
Let's start talking through the course. So you start out at Marine Park.
Yes.
And you've got about 1.5 miles of like bike path before you get to the single track trail.
Yeah.
So if you're the 100K and you're starting at 5 a.m., you're going to be starting in the dark. Last year they did a 1 hour delayed start as well. I didn't see that on the website, so I'm not sure if they're doing that this year. But if you're at 6 a.m., you might be a little bit lighter. But likely you're at a dark start, so you're with a headlamp to start. So you've got a little bit of time to kind of get your order situated, get where you want to be within the pack. Once you get to the single track, then once you get to the single track, you're headed towards the first aid station, which is the Waklela aid station, a mile 6.1. And what's really nice about the opening 38 miles of this race is every single aid station is almost very equally spaced. So if you've got it timed out to where I know what I need for 6 miles, 6 to 7 miles each time, you could probably repeat that process with your crews or with your drop bags for exactly what you need. Totally. So first 6.1 miles to Waklela aid station, then you head to Ainsworth. That's a state park that's on the road there. Another aid station there, no crew access at that one. Yep. So you would have just drop bag.
And I think I remember that one's kind of, it's just as a few of these are just right off of the road, right off the highway. And they kind of just have a tent set up and, whatever you need, the basics and hydration and a bit of food. But usually, those couple aid stations are not like the most robust ones. They're just, people are fairly quick in and out of them. Quick bottle fill here or there. And like you said, you could have the drop bag if you need it, depending on how long you're planning to take. But yeah, that's a great point about the just very regimented 6 miles, 6 to 7 miles, know what I'm going to need. And maybe if you're in the front of the pack, you're not even utilizing that first aid station, but you're waiting for that second one. And then you're just going to refill your liquids. And so then you're going to go do that big climb after. So
after Ainsworth, you head over to the Joaquina Falls area, and there is a aid station called Joaquina before you hit that major climb in that area. And that loop on the end of the course is about 5 miles, and the climb ends at about 1,500 feet, and you start at sea level. I think it's around 2,000 feet of gain within that little area.
Yeah.
So maybe there's some little ups and downs in there, but that's going to be the steepest part of the course. That's going to be a crux in terms of getting there, getting through the climb and the descent, still feeling good. You're still in the first third of the race. Yeah. So I think you want to be very comfortable at that situation, at that spot. And then just be in a spot where you know what's to come because you've just run that part of the course as you head back towards Cascade Locks.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thinking about those first 15, 18 miles, okay, I'm going to be repeating this in reverse, and on the way back. So just kind of taking note of things, and maybe on the climb you choose to eat because you're power hiking. And then, coming back, that's another spot where maybe you're going to eat and, be able to kind of digest your gels or whatever, because you're in more of a hiking mode, than bombing downhill. So I think that's a great tip around just making sure that you're conserving energy and not completely destroying yourself during that first climb, because you've got a really nice second half or last, 20 to 30 miles where you can do some running if you're able to.
It does say that poles are allowed on this course. So for those that are more comfortable moving on steeper terrain, this would be the area to use it. This would be kind of why you would have them on that technical terrain where you might be slipping a little bit. You just want that extra assurance that you can have, solid movement up and down those pieces of the course.
Yep, totally.
All right. So then we head back through, we can kind of skip through. So Ainsworth, number 2, you already went there the first time, but you're heading back towards Cascade Locks. Again, you'll hit Waklella Falls and Waklella aid station again one more time before you head back towards the start finish. And then the aid station towards the start finish is called Cascade Locks.
Yep.
You don't actually go into Marine Park on the way back. We had a friend make that mistake and head down the road. Fortunately ended his day at around 40 miles or so.
Yeah.
But if you continue on, you hit the Cascade Locks aid station. And I've heard that there's a very special piece to this aid station. I've seen pictures of Yassine Daboon there.
Yep.
And I won't spoil it for the interview, but Keely has some neat stories about what that group does at that aid station.
Yeah, and named Cascade Locks because the town that you're closest to is Cascade Locks, where a lot of people, stay in town there, and it's really just a mile or so up the road, but it is on the trail, right in the middle of the trail, and you cross that aid station twice. A lot of energy there, a lot of very accessible from a spectator standpoint too. And you go through there twice at miles 38 and a half, and then again at 58 or almost 60.
Almost done. Yeah. So it's mile 38. And then you're coming back through after you hit the Wyeth aid station, and you hit the Cascade Locks again, 58.8, about little under 2.5 miles away from the finish.
Yep.
So you get that one last little spot. And while I said, hey, the aid stations are really well spaced out for the first 38 miles, the last 20 miles, 24 miles, not so. It's like you've got a big aid station, Cascade Locks, and then you've got a long section, 10 miles out to Wyeth, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that section at that point in the day, for the elites, it might only take them an hour and 20 minutes or an hour and a half.
Mm-hmm.
But for the back of the pack, that might be 3 hours. That might be 3.5 hours out. So that's something to consider, that section out to Wyeth. Before you can pick up a pacer, you want to make sure you really have what you need.
So you hit the Cascade Locks aid station the first time, know that you have 10 miles, do whatever you need to do there. And, I recall that last year when we were out there, it just started completely pouring rain during that section.
Like, who knows?
Yeah. And it kind of got miserable. So, this is one race where, of course, follow the weather and stuff, but you might just want to have a rain jacket in your vest the entire time, because it could just, you could just get cold very quickly. It could start pouring, it's just maybe a good idea to have something like that or gloves on your person at all times.
You might need a clear umbrella.
You might want to run the whole race with an umbrella.
A clear umbrella is a pretty smart move. You've got your peripheral vision. You're not going to, you're not going to be blocked out, but you're really going to keep that water and moisture off of you.
Yeah, I'm not going to use this anytime in Colorado since we get like one day of rain a year. So this is coming with me the next time I go to the gorge.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So at Wyeth aid station, you can pick up a pacer. You're at mile 48 now. So the last 13 miles you can have, last half marathon, you can have a pacer back up the same terrain that you just went on. And really I tried to look at the elevation profile and say, like, where is all the climbing? And if you look at the chart, it looks like maybe there's more towards that back half. You'd have kind of a big climb. Well, really, that 20-mile section is 3,100 feet of elevation gain.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the same percentage when you work it out as the rest of the course.
Yeah.
Yeah. The first part of the course is just maybe more choppy. And then this last part of the course, you have maybe some sustained climbs, a little bit of a descent down into Wyeth, and then another sustained climb back up.
Yeah.
With some rollers up on the top. So, I think that's maybe the only difference, but really the grade is very similar.
Yeah. So in terms of training for this race, right, maybe just practicing running on that quote unquote douche grade in some of your long runs, and just being able to move up it, at a comfortable but like sustainable pace. Definitely, I think just working on your overall strength and then keeping speed up is also a great idea, because you really want to optimize those flat sections and be able to open up your legs and get some turnover going.
Yeah. I mean, it's a race that draws racers from all over the Western United States. There's a lot of runners from Colorado, Arizona, California, as well as the Pacific Northwest is well represented. But this is a national race. If you're coming from altitude, that's going to help you. You're going to feel better at zero elevation and at climbs that are, you'd never top out over 1,500 feet of elevation. Mm-hmm. Sea level elevation in this race. So use that to your advantage. Take the flats and take the free speed when you can get it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that, from a training perspective, if you've trained on hills and you've done some of that stuff, you're going to be well prepared.
Yeah. I think it's questionable whether you should wear glasses at this race or not, because
I would say no. I'd say contacts.
But no, like sunglasses. Okay. Sunglasses or like clear glasses, because part of me is like, maybe you need the protection if it's raining and you want to keep it out of your eyes. But at the same time, it's like the entire time we were there, it kind of felt like the sun never came up. Like mm-hmm. It was just overcast and a little bit like dim or kind of dreary.
Yeah, the canopy.
The entire time we were there. So yeah, probably personal preference, but
if you're thinking from an eye protection standpoint, like, hey, I don't want to temporarily go blind, like Courtney to Walter, this is not going to be a dusty course.
No.
So I don't know that there's going to be that risk. And if it's, if it's the worst when they get fogged up. And
maybe just a brimmed hat to keep some of it off of.
Yeah, I think something like that might be better.
Okay. All right. And then just a couple notes on what's usually available historically, or for the last couple years of this race. There has been Gnarly Nutrition, hydration, Gnarly Fuel 2.0 on course as electrolyte and liquid calories. Then there's also been Spring Energy. So Spring Energy has sponsor the race, but they usually say you can only take 2 Spring Energy per runner per aid station, which is an interesting thing. So
it's a popular piece of nutrition, right?
It is.
So
yes,
there's many people who thought like, oh, I'm just gonna load up on Spring the whole time I'm there, and I think they were disappointed last year at like kind of how it was being partitioned out. So I think they're doing a good job this year of saying, hey, listen, here's the expectation. You can have 2 per aid station that you get to. If you need more than that, you need to bring some yourself. We need to make sure that we have enough for all the runners that we're supporting at the race.
Yeah. So and then when
I think that's fair.
I kind of do, but I'm like also thinking about Cocodona and picturing Sarah Ostaszewski literally putting 15 awesome sauce in her bag. There was no cap. So I'm just like, how does that work?
No cap.
No
cap for her. Huh?
Like it was no cap that she was doing it. And there was no cap in terms of the amount of Spring Energy she could take at that aid station. So anyways,
she probably had 30 miles. So
true. Maybe they are just accounting for this. That's very true. But the aid stations are very well done. Daybreak does a great job. They're super thorough.
They're full service.
Full service
aid stations.
And then you get to Cascade Locks and you could also have a flute of Red Bull or a flute of champagne or a flute of Coke. That's historically been some of the little, they make it fancy there. Down at the, what's the aid station called? Oh, the Wyeth aid station. Last year, that was run by the Free Trail family, Free Trail community.
Ooh, okay.
And we actually nicknamed a couple of the folks in the community the Broth Boys. because they were just making this amazing, super salty broth, and it's pouring rain. And so everybody was like partaking.
They were loving it.
They were loving the broth. So there was quesadillas, broth. There's actually a bathroom there. If you need to, an actually fully established, restroom, if you need that, or if you need to change or whatever. So know that that's available for you as well.
You mentioned changing, and I think that that's a key point, and something that Keely brings up later in the discussion here. But having multiple copies of socks and extra socks, extra shoes, extra things to change it. Don't let a gear choice end your day early.
Totally. And also just make sure you be aware of chafing. Squirrel's nut butter or whatever your choice is for anti-chafe. Also probably a good idea to consider, just because you're out there in kind of the wet conditions usually.
Awesome. Anything else you want to say about Gorge Waterfall 100K before we move to our interview portion of the podcast?
No, I think you're going to get a lot of great tips and insights from our amazing guest, Keely Henninger, who is a local. So she's very used to, training in this area, and she has raced the race multiple times. So I think she got a lot of insight from somebody who's just done it and been out there and lives in that environment. So no, I think that's it. I think the 30K is a great entry to trail running. And if you want to go somewhere where it's just kind of a destination and you feel like you're kind of in a different country, like you're in this unique environment. It's a great kind of destination race, and you're super close to Portland. You can go do all the things with the family. The 50K is, another just fast, great, you want to be able to run some technical, but
if you're even if you're doing your first 50K, it would be a great one. I think there's a distance there for everybody.
Yeah. And many of our friends did this as their first 100K. It was also quite approachable from that regard. So highly recommend it. And we're excited for you to hear from Keely.
All right, let's go. Today, we welcome a special guest onto the podcast. She is a scientist and a professional trail runner and the podcast host of Trail Society on Free Trail. She's an advocate and a champion in our sport for female health. She is a 2-time Western States Golden Ticket winner and has been racing at the top of our sport for over 10 years. And for this conversation specifically, she is a 2-time finisher of the Gorge Waterfalls races. In 2016, ran the 100K for a 3rd place finish, and in 2022, ran the 50K for a 1st place finish. So welcome, and thank you for being here, Keely Henninger.
Thanks for having me, guys. I'm excited to talk with you guys about my backyard trails.
Yeah, perfect. And also just coming fresh off a win, or sorry, not a win, but a great race at the Black Canyon 60K. She paced her good friend Rachel Drake to a win in the 100K, and then decided to jump in the 60K the next day. And one thing I've always loved about you, Keely, is along the lines of being an advocate for female endurance sports. You're always all about good fueling, and you, in typical fashion, took in a whole lot of calories during that 60K with 13, 14 gels. We heard. So anything you want to say before we get started on Gorge about just, what kind of what the fueling piece does for you in races?
Yeah, I mean, I think as someone who's been in the sport for so long, I got into it as most of us do with no clue of how to fuel or why fueling was important. And most of my initial races, like, I barely fueled at all. And so I think, figuring out that it actually is really important, and then seeing how pervasive it is in the sport, that like a lot of people aren't fueling properly and how that can impact how so many negative health outcomes later, made me feel like I really needed to start verbalizing what I was doing, because I didn't think people knew how much fuel it actually took. And so I think Gorge 50K was actually the first one where I posted about it after, and people were like, what, you ate so many gels. And so now I kind of make it a thing. Like every race I try to post a pretty good representation of how many gels I've eaten. And so, Gorge was interesting because it was the first time I did it. Black Canyons was interesting because I was totally bonked out by mile 5. So I really, really pounded the gels in the first half of the race because I was like, man, I got to do something to turn this around because I just feel like garbage. And it works. It really does. I felt great at the end. Like if that would have been a 60-mile race, I would have been feeling great. But it was really fun to be out there and fueling. Obviously, I can't say enough of how important it is.
That's awesome. And have you actually run golden ticket qualifying races 3 times, but 1 time not taken the ticket? Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Okay.
so twice Lake Sonoma, Gorge Waterfalls, and then Black Canyon.
Okay. Perfect. Awesome.
So 4.
Amazing.
So 4.
Well, yeah. So we are here today to tell everybody a little bit more about Gorge. And like you said, these are your backyard trails. So who better to speak to kind of how to train on them and what they're like to actually be on? First question for you, I guess, is just, you are an ultra athlete, but is there any recommendation you give people around shoes? So one of the big things we like to talk about is, it truly matters. They can make or break your race depending on, what terrain you're running on. So what would be your recommendations around shoes, whether they're ultra or just in general, like, kind of what you're wanting to have when you're out there in the Gorge Waterfalls race?
Yeah, that's a great point, Corinne, because I think unfortunately there's not a great answer for this race. You really need to find a shoe that does everything because you not only start the race with, in most of the races, so the 50K and the 100K, you start with a climb up Wakena Falls, and then the descent off of that is super, super technical. Sometimes there's ice, sometimes there's water, like it's bound to be technical and slippery. So you need a trail shoe that's really good at technical for a lot of the race. However, some of the race is also on the Pacific Crest Trail, which is really buff single track. And then I would say like 3 to 5 miles of the 50K and double that of the 100K is on road. So you also need to be able to run on road with that shoe. And so I'm lucky that I actually love my shoe that Ultra provides. It's called the BOA, the Mont Blanc BOA, because it is like has these dials that let you like tighten it. It's really good on the trail, but it also is like pretty cushy. So on the road, it feels great. And so obviously not everybody likes Ultra. Totally fine with me. You just should find a shoe that like locks your foot in solid, but is also like a comfy enough shoe that you're okay running on road with it, because you're probably not going to change your shoes for the road section. There's just like logistically that doesn't make sense. So you're just going to need the best all around trail shoe you can find that also has some cushion. So I know that's kind of like a hard one to find because we're like, give us the best shoe ever. But for Gorge, I think it would be really helpful if you have one like that.
Do you tighten and loosen your shoes in the middle of the race?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I do.
That's
yeah. And I mean, I used to not when I had laced shoes, and that cost me my race in 2022 Western States. And so now I'm diligent. Like the first slip I feel where my foot's moving too much, I tighten them down.
Well, yeah, that's awesome. Interesting. All right,
that's
Russ,
great.
next.
Yeah, I was really curious if you could dive into maybe some specific things that you did ahead of 2022 or 2016 that you felt like set you up for success at both of those races, because you ran great both times. I mean, obviously, I don't know if it was hometown for both of them, but definitely like being a hometown race probably is helpful. But was there anything else that you did specifically that you could share?
Yeah, I'd say 2016 was definitely more of a lucky race than an advantaged race. Like I just really got lucky. I think I didn't have my fueling really down. But I think running on those trails, like I was familiar with them, really helped. 2022, one thing that I really started implementing early on was a lot of course recon. And so, if you're not from the Portland area, just adding in more technical trails than you're used to, I think just like the smallest viable dose even works. Like if you can get out on them twice before the race, it's just going to help you become more confident during the race when you hit those more technical sections. And so because I don't run technical trails very often, I live in Portland and don't venture out there all the time, especially not in the winter. I just made it a point to go out there so that I would get those technical trails under my legs. And then because it packs a lot of what we like to call, and I don't know who deemed this term, but it's unofficially called douche grade, all of the climbs are runnable. If you want them to be, they don't have to be, but they're not quite steep enough that you feel good hiking. They're like gradual enough that you feel like you should run them. So I did a lot of like threshold work on hills with similar grades. And so you guys can look at like the course profile, but I would pick hills that are pretty runnable, but like longer, and just practice kind of doing work on those so that when you get to race day, like those hills aren't crazy for you. And I think that combined with the technical running is really helpful. And then, like any training plan, you want to work everything. So, just getting faster in general will help you with the roads as well. But yeah, those were the two things I focused on.
Yeah. Overall fitness is always super important. So similar kind of along those lines. So how about, the downhills? Like, do you feel like this course, because it does have a little bit of everything, is better suited for somebody, or where could you make up time if you were kind of trying to like, you're really trying to run your best race? Should you focus on optimizing, the downhills? Should you focus on being able to run steady on the climbs, or what would be your advice around that?
I think especially like if we're talking about the 100K, I think the race can be won in the back half, because the first part is normally sloppy and dark, and there's a lot of road mixed in, but like nobody's gonna be running way faster than you up Wakina and down the backside down those slippery rocks. But if you can make it through that section and then run the Gorge 400 trail to the next aid station, then run the road, and then get to Cascade Locks and get on the PCT, and you can run those butter trails fast, that's where you can like make up a ton of time, because again, the climbs on those aren't very steep. The trails are not very technical at that point. So you end with nice cushy trails. And so you can really start like mowing people down if you can just like hang during that first half, which, in general should be kind of how you race 100K anyways. But definitely for this race, you can make up a ton of time on that back half. And then for the 50K, I'd say it's really just like how I like to word it to my athletes who are racing it. It's like survive the first 7 miles. So like climb that first climb nice and steady, make it through that technical slippery descent down into the 400 trail, and then turn on your racing jets, and then slowly pick them up as you get through the technical sections. Because again, it gets less technical as it goes on. So you can really let it rip. But if you burn yourself on that first climb and you can't run the technical or the not technical sections, then you're going to lose a lot of time, because those are the ones you should be running.
That's amazing. That's great. Are there any other races that like give kind of similar vibes? Is it just like very prototypical Pacific Northwest? There's going to be people. This is turning into like a real national race. It has been in the past. It has been a golden ticket race in the past.
Yep.
It's been a very popular race, and then kind of the fires happened. It kind of transitioned, and now Dylan Bowman and his team at Daybreak has kind of taken this maybe it's maybe kind of growing. So I think there's a real national appeal to Gorge again now. And, there's going to be people coming from all over. And just like at Black Canyon, people are training in winter conditions, trying to then do a desert race. Like, what can they do to kind of look at it? Or are there other races that are very similar to this?
I don't know of any other races necessarily that are similar, aside from maybe some other ones in the Pacific Northwest. Like I'm sure some, like Chuckanut's relatively similar. I'd say Chuckanut's broken up a little differently, where there's a fast section is in the beginning and at the end, and then the middle is the most gnarly. But Chuckanut's probably a pretty good, like it's relatively similar. Probably anything up in BC is going to be close, and then like Tillamook Burn. There's a lot of other ones that are a little south of Portland that also have similar trails. But I would say like they're not specific to Portland in the sense that you can't prepare for them anywhere else. Like if you're in a different state, just find the trails that you have that have the most climbing in them and have the most technicality. And like you're not going to be unprepared by doing that. Like I have a ton of athletes. One athlete trained for it in Montana, another athlete trained for it in Flatland, Iowa. So like there's a way to get around it. It's just, you got to be a little more creative. So you have to go seek out trails that maybe are a little more technical and not. and then just work on hills however you can, whether that's a treadmill, a short little hill in your backyard, or like you actually have access to more bigger hills, then that'd be great. But yeah, I'm not sure of any races that are like a 1-for-1 for this one.
It's its own, it's
And then
it's
I guess as a
unique,
follow,
and that's why you have to go do it because it's the only one that's like it, right?
Yeah, yeah. And it will, and
Good.
you should probably prepare just mentally for really crazy conditions because you might get a really great day or you might get a
Yeah.
crazy day. Yeah.
I mean, the way I picture it is it's like canopy tree covered the entire time. Like you don't see the sun hardly at all, but I guess that's just maybe like from an outsider's look at some of these things. I know Corinne and a few friends went last year and, set up this camera shot next to a waterfall, and we're like working on, there's just like iconic pictures of this race kind of all over the place.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the scenery is
It's
amazing.
beautiful.
But it was very, very like dreary and kind of dark-ish while we were there because it was really rainy. And the race, I believe, moved a couple weeks later this year. So part of that was in an attempt to maybe get it to a little bit nicer weather window. It was pretty sloppy and
which is
and
kind of a fool's
muddy.
errand.
Yeah, right. It's like Colorado. There could be snow or sun, but yeah, like either one's equally as like possible. But okay, so one question that just came to mind as we were talking about this, did you wear a pack for both races? And do you think that with the way aid stations are set up, you could go either way depending on just kind of what your personal preference is?
I used a handheld for the 50K. So I think that 50K lends itself to being fast. If you want it to be, you don't need a pack because there's a lot of aid. And so you can get by with just a handheld, especially if you are diligent and you fill it at every aid. Because I had a friend who did a handheld and didn't fill it, and then they ran out of water. And it's like, well, of course you did. But I'd say like you can also run a 50K with a pack. Like that's fine too, and just fill that at every aid. Or maybe you can skip an aid because you have 2 bottles. And so I don't think there's like a one size fits all for that, even though there is a ton of aid, because I think some people just feel more comfortable with a pack on. They have their hands free. They don't have to carry, little weights the whole time. So I think a pack for the 50K is also fine. And then for the 100K, I think it would be silly to use a handheld. I think a pack is where to go because it just lets you hold calories and backup calorie options in case those calories don't work, and then lets you always have an extra bottle because, again, to our points, like it could be dumping on you rain and cold, or it could be like 65 and sunny. And for those of you coming from Colorado, you might not be quite ready for that yet. So it's better to have the 2 bottles, I'd say. And then if you have a pack and you're doing the 100K, you probably will need a raincoat. So it's good to just have that in there too if you don't want to get just completely drenched during the race. So yeah, I'd say I'd gravitate towards the pack, especially for the 100K, but the 50K, you'd be fine with a pack also. But yeah, I use the handheld for my 50K and a pack for the 100K.
Yeah. So, okay. So I have a follow-up on kind of terrain. We were talking about how there's road sections, there's technical sections. Like what percentage of, say, the 100K would you say is that rocky technical?
I would say like 12 to 15%.
12 to 15%. Okay.
Not a ton. Yeah. Because 60 miles,
Okay.
I'd say it's about 6 to 8 miles of that.
Okay. And then what makes up the majority? There's also, how much the other 2 or the rest of it's made up in road, like what percentage of paved road? Because I know there's some paved road sections.
I would say about the same.
Okay. And that would leave the majority being, how would you describe it, like underfoot?
The rest would be between like buff single track and like moderately technical. So what you'll encounter in like a normal trail run.
Okay. Perfect. No, that's helpful. I mean, I think also just for being able to like potentially kind of turn your brain off a little bit at certain times or not pay so much attention, like knowing, okay, if I get to this road section and pavement, I don't have to think about my footing for a second, so I can
Mm-hmm.
like zone out or what, whatever. I don't know, as opposed to having to be engaged fully the entire time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Just don't disengage too much, because that's what I did at Western States, and then I fell on the road.
I know.
So
Um,
too soon.
Pro tip. Pro tip. I know. I know. That's where you always. I just fell at Black Canyon, and it was on a smooth section. It's like it
Yep.
gets you
You stop paying attention, and then it gets you. Yeah.
Exactly.
Like
Exactly.
I did fall at Gorge the 50K a couple of times, and the first time was right on camera, like at mile 5, right in that really technical section. We were like all running in a group, and then the camera guy's right with us running too. It was just chaos, and like of course I fall right there. But that section you will fall on, and it will be, even if you're being mindful, it's slippery. So just be really careful on it. Like I tell all my athletes, like falling there is not worth it. So if you need to slow down a little bit in that first 10K, it doesn't matter. Like you're going to get it back. And the first 10K and the 50K, it's like mile 20-ish in the 100K, because you go out to it after you start in a different spot. So that big climb area with the technical descent, just take it easy.
Did you find a big difference between your experience at the 100K in 2016 versus 2022 with the difference in the race organization?
I mean, it definitely has more media coverage now. So, I mean, back in what year, what did I do it? 2016? Wow. There was no coverage. Even it being a golden ticket race, right? Like you just looked at Iron Far after the race to see who
At the
won.
end,
It wasn't, yeah, it wasn't like broadcast.
maybe you had an update, but that was it.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, it was a completely different. But it still drew a lot of women. Like I remember running with Darcy and like some of the OGs in the sport, and like it was a stacked field then too. And so I think that is still the same. But yeah, there's like a lot more hype around it now. I'd say the race orgs are doing a lot more commentary during it. They're like elevating the athletes afterwards as well. So I think it's just like a lot of the sport right now, it's just being elevated.
No, that's really cool. I'm excited to see if it ends up becoming a golden ticket race, or either that or Big Alta. I'm not sure, but I think my hot take is that at least one of those is going to be a golden ticket race sometime soon.
Oh, I like that hot take.
I think they'd both be great. Yeah. We had a group go out. So I was actually going to race, but I was injured. So I just crewed, but it was a number of our local run clubs, first 100Ks, and one of our runners first 50K. And I think everybody just had a fantastic experience, even though it was not the best conditions, and it was, kind of rainy all day. Actually, it poured for a good amount of it. But yeah, I think overall, just the atmosphere and the vibe was something that they were super excited to be around. And it was you just felt like you were like in a different place. You felt like you were running in a unique environment. And like, that was just a really cool part of it.
All right. Thinking about maybe some of the runners that might be mid or back of the pack here, call out maybe something that they should be looking forward to, or like a section of the trail that they should be like really like looking forward to seeing, or something to that effect, because they're going to be, you said they start in the dark, most likely they're going to end in the dark too. And so, those middle miles, hopefully they see some waterfalls or some things like that, but what should they be looking out for?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So first of all, the sunrise in the gorge is the first thing they should observe wherever they are in the course, because that is the most beautiful thing in the area, I think. Again, I'm biased. I live here and I love it, but it's so pretty. The second thing would be the waterfalls, obviously. So Joaquina Falls is beautiful. Tunnel Falls is beautiful. You run through so many of them. Just take it all in. It's really cool. And also those sections are typically the most technical. So just slow down on purpose, because you're being safe and you want to experience the waterfall. And then the third is the aid station by Yassine and the Wolf Pack, because they always dress in the craziest outfits, and they'll have like fun little like I don't even know, goblets with like pickle juice in it, and they'll make you feel like a queen, and they'll give you whatever you want. They'll heckle you. They're so fun. And so look out for that aid too. Make sure to stop at that one and like have some fun, because they're really, really fun, and they do so much for the Portland area, and they also always volunteer at these races. And so their aid station is always my favorite whenever I go and run these races.
Yeah.
I heard AJW make a comment about, hey, I noticed nowadays these people are staying in aid stations longer and longer. And I think the comment was, yeah, that's what happens in the back of the pack over here. So they need to take it in. Is he going to have like kind of like the butler get up and kind of the whole
Maybe. I think they do different themes every year, so I'm not sure what they're doing this year, but they've definitely done the butler before. They've done like crazy wigs before, it's just always whatever they're feeling.
No, that's awesome.
And that aid station, I know you go through it twice in the 100K. Do you do it twice in the 50K as well, or just once? Twice.
Yep, twice.
Okay, that's awesome. Yeah, that's a really good spot, and it's a great crew accessible or just like spectator accessible spot. You can drive right up to as well. Yeah, the flutes of champagne and Red Bull and like chocolate fountain. That was really cool and very unique. I don't think that happens at any other race that I am aware of.
No.
So, yeah. Sweet. Okay, anything else that we missed about?
Oh, go ahead.
No, Russ, you've got one.
I was just going to say, you mentioned you had some athletes running the race that you're preparing them for, or you have in the past. Are you planning on being out there at all this year, or since you're close to the area?
Yeah, I'll be out for the 30K cheering, and then I'm going to pace one of my good friends in the 100K, and then I'll also be most likely out cheering the 50K as well. So I'll be out all 3 days.
Nice.
Well, that'll be awesome. Hopefully we'll get to see you on some of the...
Oh, yeah, the coverage, yeah. Do you think you'll race it again in the future?
Maybe. Probably not. I've done it twice, and I get to run the trails all the time. So to me, like, unless it becomes a golden ticket race, then maybe, that'd be cool. Yeah. But I don't know. I think I get to run them all the time, that I actually just like going out and making it more about the community than making it about a race. So
nice.
Do you get I mean, it's a little bit of ways away from you in Portland. Do you get out there quite a bit? What would you be using those kinds of trails to train for in terms of other races?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'd say the Gorge is where you get the most vertical gain per mile in your run. So if you want a lot of elevation gain, I go out there. I use that for training grounds for Western States. It's like a 45-minute drive. It's not that bad. And there's like a spa out there where you can soak afterwards if you want to. There's like a lot of good coffee shops. So there's like other good reasons to go out there too. But yeah, there's a ton of good elevation gain. And like big mountains, so you can climb, up to 3,000 to 5,000 feet in a climb, and so you can get really big climbing in. I did all my training for CCC part of UTMB out there, and so yeah, I think the Gorge is like the hidden gem of Portland. Like it can prepare you for pretty much any gnarly race that you're training for. So it's awesome.
Does anyone use poles on this race?
I don't know if they're allowed.
Okay. I guess we could figure that out. But I guess if most of it is that kind of 5 to 10%.
But I'm sure some people do. And I think if they want to use poles, that's great, But I'd say the majority do not. But if you want to use poles, then they're allowed, preface that, then go for it. If that makes you comfortable,
Yeah. For sure. Awesome. All right. Well, we will wrap it up. I think, is there anything else that, just general advice that you'd share about prepping for the race, about when you're in the middle of the race running it, or just from your experience that, you look back on and have learnings about your own personal races there?
Yeah, I'd say I'll just reemphasize, like, take the first half, whether it's the 50K or the 100K, easy, and then try to have legs for the second half, because it does get easier. And then something that, like, you'd think I'd have learned by now, but I made this rookie mistake actually in Thailand, but I'd say I've known of some people making this mistake in Gorge, is if you're doing the 100K, and probably not the 50K, but maybe the 50K. Have your crew, if you have a crew or a drop bag, with extra shoes and socks and dry stuff in it, because if it's just soaking wet the whole time, you don't know what can happen to your feet. So just deal with that when it gets really wet, and you can always change. And so just always have backups of everything, regardless if you feel like you won't need them, because you're better safe than sorry. So I would say those are my two pieces of advice.
Awesome. Russ, you have anything else?
No, that's it. You did great. That was great. Thank you so much, Keely. Really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us today.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Keely. Yeah, super impressed with, I mean, you've run so fast on these trails and just had incredible performances out there. And yeah, it's awesome. You are now training athletes to prepare for it. And if we're ever out there again, we will make sure to connect with you.
Yes, please do.
All right. Thank you.
Of course.